Okay. So deep.
It's been half a year since you touched Unity, so this will be a great refresher. Yeah, sweet.
Yo, yeah. That's exactly what, yeah, this is also a great way to like retouch on some of the like base parts of Unity. So I'm glad, yeah. And then we'll also be, the workshops in the future will be covering more deeper about like visual scripting, not visual scripting, sorry, C# scripting, and we'll get more deeper into like some of the components that we touch on right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Visual scripting is a whole different thing.
Oh, I should have asked if I could tell that story. I'll pull it up. Give me a minute.
You
No,
can ask the end.
yeah, slides will be shared after the meeting.
Same with the recording. Wait, Alex, do you have the recording set up?
Yep.
All right, sweet.
We should be
Are
good.
we good?
Should be good.
Okay. 1 minute. Yeah. How do you see program Java? We'll be only doing Java in this class, so it'll be great. This workshop.
Let's see. Is the recording set up? It should be. Yep, there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes,
3
recording.
5.
What are we posting? Okay, 3 of 5. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Welcome to Unity. I hope everybody, if the slides are working, I think they are. All right. So, next slide. How does Unity work? That's what we're going to be discussing today. We're going to be talking about everything. So, first off, when you open Unity, you're going to see this, the default layout. And there's 5 components to it. We can look at it here. And it's pretty overwhelming at first, especially when you haven't seen any of this, but we can break it down into 5 things. At the very top, you have this toolbar. And it's basically how you can save your game. It's how you're going to create your game objects. It's how you can like change the parameters and setting of the game. I totally recommend when you install Unity for the first time, just like panning through each one of these things and just seeing what Unity has. A lot of the things that you can do are just hidden away in that top bar. Actually, a lot of these things hide a lot of really cool things that you can do. So I definitely recommend just like clicking around everything and seeing what happens. If it breaks, you reinstall it and you're good. So yeah. And the second thing is the viewport. It's the center screen. It's basically how you're going to be, where you're going to be creating your world. It shows up, it's this empty void of space, and you're going to be placing these objects in it, and we'll talk about what those are soon. And it's basically like your Mario world. It's your Breath of the Wild open world. You're going to be creating it. You can create anything there. So yeah, you can fly around in there. We'll talk about that in the demonstration. But yeah, so the hierarchy is another very important thing. On the left of the viewport, and this is basically where you're going to be seeing the object that you created. And you can also see that there's a plus at the top left there. We'll go over how to create objects, but it's basically your object's glossary. And every time you see, like you can see this cool cube selected in the viewport, and it will also show up in the hierarchy. And that's basically like a list of objects. Yeah. So the hierarchy is pretty cool. The viewport, the toolbar, but the inspector on the right is basically what you're going to be looking at probably for most of the time. Inspector, you can see my cool cube is also showing up here. And this is basically where you change all the settings and the parameters and the variables. There's a lot of stuff. We'll get into it. But basically, you can see it has this transform components, is this mesh filter. We'll talk about that. And it has this box collider. It has all these things inside of it. So basically, is where you'll edit these objects. And we'll talk about what objects are, what components are very soon. And the final thing, the very bottom here, is your project view. It's basically your file explorer for the game. It actually literally is a file explorer, and you can see all these objects in your file explorer. I wouldn't recommend doing that, though, because you need to hide some stuff with this project explorer, this project view. So I definitely go here. But it's basically where you'll be saving your assets, organizing them. Definitely recommend doing that. And it'll basically, you can sort, there's this search bar at the top of it, and it really is helpful for organizing your projects. And yeah, so that's the layout. We got 5 parts of it, and it's the first thing you're going to see. So, but what is all this stuff? What is that blue cube in the center? Let's talk about it. So we talked about this void of space. That's our scene. And it's basically the area of space that you'll fill stuff with. And those stuffs, or that blue cube and everything else, is your game objects. The scene is almost like the 1-1 of Mario. Actually, I don't think 1-1 was a scene, but it was like, it's basically the world that you're creating, and then you can have multiple scenes that load in, and it's basically the areas of the game that you're creating. And the game objects, like that blue cube, is your Mario, your Goomba, and we'll talk about that actually very soon. And it's basically these empty objects that can be given components. And let's talk about that right now. Components are basically objects. So we have these game objects we can modify, and then we can also give them components, and that's how we basically make them move. That's how we give them a spot in the world. And so yeah, components like this Goomba, for example, has this giant green square above it. That green square is how it's hitbox, and it basically shows how when Mario stomps on him, and that's basically how we know that Mario's there. And that component, that hitbox, is a component that we can add to our game object, and it basically gives it a spot in the world. So some example components are the transform component that's basically on all game objects, and it basically shows it, you can see at the top right here as a position, scale, and rotation, and it basically gives that spot a place in the world. We also have our sprite renderer component that we'll be using a lot probably if we're making a 2D game in GDA, and it basically is how we render a sprite in the world. And we also have our C# component that we'll be talking about very soon, and it's basically where we're going to be spending most of the time as GDA programmers. So let's talk about it. The
Jonah, just
C#
a heads up, wait,
script.
if you don't mind
Yeah,
if I interrupt.
yeah.
If you're using your cursor at all, we're not able to see it. So,
Oh,
oh wait, no, we
wait,
can
can you?
now. Wait.
Yeah, I wasn't using it. Sorry,
Oh, okay, okay. Just
but
just making
I
sure.
should
Just
be using it, actually. That's
yeah,
smart. Yeah,
just
yeah.
making sure. No, I thought you
No,
were,
thank you.
and it
Oh,
wasn't showing
yeah,
up.
yeah.
Okay. Hit
Oh,
L for
hit
laser
L for
pointer.
laser pointer? Okay, we're gonna be using
Yo.
this. That's great. Okay, so let's go over what we just talked about because I just said a lot. We have seen, boom, laser pointer. We have scenes, we have game objects. This is awesome. We have game objects, and this cube right here, boom, 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 is a game object. I shouldn't overuse it. And then we have scenes that we put those game objects in, but those game objects don't actually do anything until we give them components. And components like this big box and this giant arrow and this little thing and the actual sprite of self of the Goomba are all components that we give to the empty box to make it do stuff. Okay. Now, C# script component. That is one of the components that we can give our objects to actually give it code and give it well, I said give it a lot. We can make it do stuff. So the C# script component is broken down into these two things. And when you create it, you can actually just type it at the very bottom. We'll go over this in the demonstration, but you can just type out the name of your script, and then you can just press new script, and it will basically create another component just like this rigid body that we'll talk about soon, and it'll be a script that we can use. So now when we open the script in our editor of choice, like Visual Studios Code, there's a lot of them, but we'll actually talk about installing that in a future workshop. We're just going to go over the basics right now. But when you open it, you're going to see this text document, and this is C# code. The first thing you'll notice at the very top, that will not be using it, but at the very top, at line 5, you can see the name of the script. Like, for example, this is SCR example. You don't need this SCR thing. This is just a tag to represent that's a name of a script. There's different naming conventions. And then you can see, we're going to skip over this right now. This pointer's awesome. Then you can see at line 10, we have a start method. This is basically any code that's inside here will trigger at the very beginning of the game. When you press that plus button, when you press that run button, sorry, not plus, basically this code will get fired and start. If you've used a different game engine before, like I believe if you use Game Maker Studio, there's a step event. I mean, create like an light bulb create event. That basically is the same exact thing as it is here. So it's basically going to start at the very beginning of the game. The second thing to note is this update method. This update method is going to be called every frame of the game, every step. And it basically allows us to do actions throughout the game. Like if a Goomba is moving around in the step event, or the update event, sorry, it will be moving forward every frame. So now let's talk about, so we have this C# script component. It's a component. We add it to our game object. We open it up. There's some code. We see the start event, the update event, but let's think about what is actually happening here. What is in the script? So the core of scripts in Unity is basically you're going to do 3 things. You're going to take a component and define it. So like, for example, we have this rigid body component, and we can create a variable called rigid body RB. And then inside our start event, the very first frame, we can grab this component and put it into that variable. So game object dot basically refers to this version of the game object. Let's say this is like a component in a Goomba, and we can call it. But by the way, there's a lot of stuff. We'll go over this in the demonstration, but I'm going to lay it a lot on you. So let's keep going. But we have this get component rigid body, and it basically grabs this component that the Goomba has and puts in this variable. Then we can manipulate it and do in the update event RB dot, and this basically is referring to this rigid body right here, and then add a force to it. There's a bunch of things that every component has that can be called, but basically add force, for example, is going to propel that rigid body forward. There's a lot of things all these game objects have that can be edited, and we'll talk about some of them in future workshops. We'll go deeper in depth into the code of each one. But yeah. Oh yeah, and Tyler points out a really good thing is that the mono behavior part of this is a very important part of Unity. Basically, all the scripts can have this mono behavior tag. It's actually not a tag, but it's basically an inheritance of script example. I think I'm explaining this wrong, but it gives you the power to use a lot of these Unity functions. There's other ways to do this. You can do a script. There's other tags you can put here to replace this mono behavior, and they'll do different things. But for right now, basically to know, mono behavior is the default state of your scripts, and it's important to have so you can do all these cool things. We'll get more in depth through it. We have more workshops in the future about scripting, but we'll also go over everything I just said in the demonstration. But basically, the thing you should be pulling away from this slide is that we have components. They can be scripts. They can also have a start method that updates at the very beginning. We have an update method that go every frame. And yeah, so let's keep going. So some other things. We talked about scripts, other components. We talked about components. We talked about game objects. But let's say you have a game object. You have some code that you want to have run, but you don't actually have a place for it. Like for this example, we had a Goomba, and this Goomba had a Goomba movement script, and we knew that this Goomba would have this. But let's say we have a thing called like a monster manager, and it doesn't have a place in the world to be put on. We can just make an empty game object with no art on it and just put it in the void and then attach a script to it. This is a very common practice, and basically allows us to know that there's a script that can be run on this. There's a game object that controls the script, and it helps organize our thought process. And we can also give it this like blue triangle by pressing this button over here, and it actually won't be seen by the player when you're running the game, but it helps us as game developers to see it in the world. So that's one thing you can do. This example is actually from Asterion, our last game that we just made in GDA. Pretty cool. So the next thing is game objects of game objects. So there's a lot of stuff here, but basically everything we just talked about can be put inside of another game object. So for example, this crude Mario interpretation, I can say that, this is my bad Mario design, but we basically can make a player game object that is a parent to all these other game objects, like this hat that can be flown off because it's like Mario Odyssey. Thank you, Alex. But basically, we can stack game objects on game objects. And the reason we do that is because we want them to move together. So this player parent, when it moves, all these children will follow it. And they'll move at the same position, and they'll be set, like their origin point will be actually the player object. So when we throw the hat out, we don't have to recalculate where the player is. We can just make it move back to its origin point, which is really helpful when we start like piling objects onto each other, when we start making really big games. So yeah, the third thing is saving your game object. Let's say we make a really cool cube, for example. If we want to save that object and repurpose it, all we have to do is take it, drag it into our set, and you can actually see it right here. We drag this object into here, and then now we have this prefab. This prefab can be re-dragged into the world, and you get a bunch of cool cubes. But the thing is that why are we doing this? Why are we making a bunch of cool cubes? The reason we do this is that we can edit just this prefab, like the color of this prefab, and then all of these cubes get updated. So it helps us scale down, like let's say Goombas. They're all going to use the same code, usually, and you're going to have a bunch of them probably. Like Mario has like a ton of Goombas. But I don't want to code a Goomba object for every single one. I can have this prefab where I just edit the Goomba and all of them get updated at once. It's super helpful, and it helps a lot when we're starting to scale up our projects. So yeah, we can make empty game objects, we can have game objects inside of game objects, and we can save our game objects. And we can even save these game objects, which are game objects. There's a lot of game objects. Okay, but basically, I just said a lot, but basically all you need to know, well, there's a lot of stuff, but the core idea of GDA, the core way we're going to make games, it was going to make some game objects. We're going to make that Goomba. You're going to move the object around until you know where you want them to be. Like you're going to move that Goomba onto World 3, and then you can give those game objects a bunch of components. Fill that game object with, fill that Goomba with a move code, a nav mesh, a hitbox, and then you're going to just do it until it works. And then you're going to repeat that process until games get made. You're going to make more Goombas. You're going to make a Mario. You're going to fill it with components. And yeah, that's the secret formula. Not so secret now, but yeah. So if anyone has any questions about what all of the things I just said, feel free to ask right now. If you want to ask in the chat or just unmute yourself. But we'll also go over in a couple minutes a demonstration of all that stuff, and I hope it will make more sense then. But yeah, thank you so far. We'll pause for probably 5 minutes. Is it possible to make a fully 2D game? 100%, yeah. Unity is capable of doing 2D and 3D and VR and a ton of stuff. It can do too much, honestly. But yes, you can actually create a Unity project. We'll go through that in the demonstration. That's built straight out for 2D. Does Unity have a behavioral tree system like Unreal? So Unity has an animation system that you could technically use to be a behavioral tree, but I probably wouldn't do that. You can create your own behavioral tree system, or you can also install a different, there's a lot of plugins Unity has that will support that. So I think I don't have any off the top of my head, but there's a lot out there. Yeah, VR support. Well, yeah, it's tough. I don't know. Yeah, but there's a lot of good asset store. The whole thing, Unity is so good because there's so many plugins that people build. There's a lot of support for it. Will the recordings be located? They will probably be posted in, we have this chat at the very bottom called previous meetings. We'll probably post it there in this Discord. Yeah. Boom. Boom, boom. And then let me open up. Oh, yeah. We'll go with that in a second. But I'm going to open up Unity real quick. Actually, I'm going to close it. Open it up here. Okay. Is it possible to code in Unity with something other than C#? That's a good question. I think that's a good question. Does Unity? I don't know if that. Yeah, I think it's probably possible, but I don't know out of the head how to do it. Okay, yeah, Tyler is probably. I would definitely talk to Tyler about that. I think that there's some ways you can do it, but I've never done it myself personally. But, yeah, not by default. I think at 3:25 we'll get into the demonstration. C# is more akin to Java compared to C. C is a lot more lower level compared to C#. If you know C though, I think C# will be not too hard to learn. Yeah, C# is basically Java. Well, not basically, but yeah, but C is a lot more low level, and yeah, C I would compare more to C++ for sure. And we'll also go over how to code more in depth in C#, like the syntax and everything, in our future workshops. I think next workshop. No, actually, next one is GitHub, but the one after that will be C#. Yeah, yeah, it's basically a Java competitor. But I think we'll probably start the workshop. I mean the demonstration sooner, because if anyone else has any questions that they want to mute, but I think we'll probably go ahead pretty soon.
Let's go for it.
Well, okay, yeah, let's do it. Okay, so basically, let's demonstrate everything we just talked about. Yeah. So if you want to install Unity, we'll post a link after this demonstration to get it installed. Actually, Calix, if you want to post it in chat, that'd be great. But I wouldn't install it probably right now because it would take a while. But basically, when you open up your Unity install, you'll see this Unity hub, and the first thing you're gonna do is actually, if it's installing another thing, you have to go to the Installs tab and install an editor. There's a bunch of versions, but basically, I would probably recommend one of the LTS versions. They're long-term support Unity. Make sure these stay updated and that actually work. They won't crash. So I would install one of these, and yeah, Calix just posted the Unity Hub download. So you would install one of these. Wait, what? Oh, that wasn't you. That was Tyler. Sorry, don't need steal credit. Yeah, you would install it. You'd install the editor, and then you would go to projects. So once you got that installed, once you got the Unity Hub, and if you have Unity already installed and you have a version installed, I would totally follow along if you wanted to. But if you don't have it installed, totally understand. You can watch. We'll post this after to follow along if you want. But yeah, so the first thing you're going to do is press New Project, and you'll select your version, and then you'll select one of these templates. There's a ton of templates. There's some crazy ones like VR. There's like third person. There's like a car one, I think. But we'll start probably with this 3D core. I won't actually be create projects, but if you want to follow along, I would do that. But I'm going to open up this already built demo projects that just has this example script. It is already open. They're right. Okay. We're reopening it. Forgot I already opened this. Okay. So it'll take a second. Unity is a little bit slow when it opens. It is here. Okay. So yeah, when you open up the game, the first thing you're going to see is this empty world. Oh, sorry, not the game. Unity. When you open up Unity, the first thing you're going to see is this just empty void. As we talked about, this is our viewport. And to move around in it, you can hold right click. You get this eyeball. You can look around, and you can press W to move forward, S to move back, A and D to strafe left and right. It's basically like if you play an FPS, you can move around, and yeah. Oh, how much free space do you need to install Unity? That's a good question. I think upwards of like 20 to 30 gigabyte, or okay. Well, I guess it depends what you're doing. Yeah, it can be. It depends what packages you install, if depending on what you want to do. But I would say having like 1.5 gigabytes. Oh, that's actually pretty good. Yeah, 1.5 gigabytes then. Yeah. All right. So you move around your world. You're gonna see just this sun for right now, and I think actually you might see a plane depending on what thing you choose. But yeah, you can move around this world. Hold right click, WSAD. You can also press Q and E to move up and down. Okay, so now we see this. We can move around a world. But how do we actually do anything? We have these two objects: our main camera and directional light. The main camera, basically, you can see it down here. You can also press game to see what it actually sees. This will be like where you run the game. And this light component, this light game object, has two components: the light and the transform. We'll actually notice that every component that we have, every game object that we have, has a transform component attached to it. It basically gives it this space where you can move it around. Oh, to note, when you go up to a game object, you can hold one of these three arrows and move it around the space. X, actually, no, wait, is it, I think, yeah, no, sorry, different game engines is different things, but red is X, blue is Z, and then green is Y. Okay, yeah, so we can move around our space, and let's say, one more thing before we get into actually like creating anything. If you move super far out, you can go up to your hierarchy, select one of your game objects. You can see them getting selected. And you can just press the key F, and it'll zoom in. And you press it again, it'll zoom in further, and you'll zoom up right to it. Yeah, so it helps you if you're like super far out. You're working on something else over here. You want to go over. You just press FF. You're back. Okay. So let's actually create something. We talked about all these things you could do, but we haven't actually done anything. So the first thing you do is you go up to this plus button, press 3D object, and you can create a plane. So we have this giant flat surface floating in space, a little bit off of where we want it to be. So let's fix that first. But to note, we just created a game object. This is the first game object. If you're following along, you created. Good job. We got a game object. It's a plane, pretty sick. But we can go up here to the transform component and press right-click and reset. So it'll place it back at the origin point of the world. This is really helpful because Unity just likes to create things in random spots of space. It's not actually random, but basically it feels like it. So yeah, now we have this plane component at the center origin point, and yeah. And then you can see the star up here. It basically shows that our game hasn't been saved yet. So let's do that. We want to save this beautiful plane component. So we're going to press Control S, and yeah, now it's saved. You learn something new every day. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. It helps a lot. But okay, so now we have this plane, and in space. So let's actually create something else. What are we going to do with this plane? We're going to create another object. We're going to do a 3D object. We're going to create a cube, also floating in space, but we can just move it over the plane like this. Another way of doing that. And we'll notice, now if we go to the game scene, we'll see our plane, we'll see our cube. This is a really lame game, honestly. But, boom, we got a game. Actually, it's not a lame game. If this is your first thing, awesome. We got a cube and a plane. This is pretty sweet. But let's actually make something happen here. We have this cube, and it starts with this transform component. cube component, mesh renderer component, and box collider. These are all, like we talked about the transform component. But the box collider, if you press it and press edit collider, you can actually see each object has this like green layout. And you can see the plane, I think, also has it. Yeah. We can't, oh, it's a mesh collider. It's a bit different. We won't talk about that. But okay, this is box collider. It shows where it's going to collide. These points that when it hits the plane, it'll collide with it. But right now, it's not actually doing anything. When we press run, it's going I shouldn't have done this. It's going to take a sec, but it's not actually going to move. So how do we make it do something? We're going to give it a component. Remember the rules of GDA. I'm not the rules. The ancient secret strategy. We're going to create an object, and we're going to give it some components. So let's, before we create a cool script, we're going to give it a rigid body component. We can just search for it, or we can navigate through the menu and just press rigid body. And now we have a new component on this game object. So we have a cube, we created it, we put it in the world, and now it has a rigid body. If we press play now, if we save the game, and then press play, you're going to notice something different. The cube is going to fall. Holy wow. Yo, okay. So now we have a cube that falls on the ground, and it stopped at the plane because these both have colliders. So they collide together, and they prevent each other from going through each other. So let's actually make this a little more interesting. We can modify these rigid body components and change like the mass. So we can make it 10 or something. Actually, 100. It's going to go fast, but actually I think that's how it works. But yeah, and we're going to press play now, and then something else is going to happen. It falls a little bit faster. I don't know if that's how. I think mass does something else.
Nah,
But it does?
you know the steel is heavier than feathers thing.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Okay, so never mind. Doesn't actually change that. But
Yeah.
angular drag though, and you know what? We're not going to worry about that. But we have a component. We can change its mass. A mass actually, I think, if you're like shooting an object and it's colliding with it, it'll move less. Like if we shoot a ball at this object, it'll not move as much. Physics, not my strong suit. Programming though, we can do that. So we have this object and it falls. Let's say we want more of these. We can drag this object over into our assets, and now we have a prefab. So now we can move this object out of our asset menu and move it in, and now we have 2 of them. We can make it 3 of them, 1 of them, 4 of them. That's pretty cool. Oh, we don't want to stack them. So now if you run it, they all are the same exact object, not the same one in space, but the same code. And now when they all fall. Holy, okay. So if we move them a little bit more interesting, we can move them like on top of each other a little bit, and then they'll interact with each other. Like, let's see. Pretty cool. All right, let's see. And now when it runs, it should. Whoa, they fall on top of each other. Now that's cool. All right, so we're going to save this. And now let's say we want to give this object some texture. We're going to right-click, create, and add a material. This material, we're going to call it anything. We can call it matte cube. Amazing name. And then we can select, we have all these options. And there's a lot of things to materials. We'll probably maybe have a workshop on it later, but right now we're just going to click on this white square, and we can select any color in the world. We're gonna probably just do a nice like blue, and now we can just drag it onto our cube, and all of our cubes will change because this prefab connects to all of these. So you can see cube 1, 2, 3, and 4 in our hierarchy, and they relate to all 4 of these cubes. Now if we run it, actually nothing's changed, but now it's blue. So we created some objects. We made prefabs of those objects. We gave them materials, but the last thing that we can do is give them a script. So we can go to our prefab, add a component to our prefab, so all of these will be updated, and then you'll go src. So I already created an example script we'll use for base, but we can do, actually, let's just use that for now. But we could type any name here. We could just press new script. Unity will create our own script component. We're just going to use what we already built in the past. I built this before I even started, and we can open it up either by, I think, yeah, you can go to these 3 dots here and go to edit scripts, or just double click, and it'll open up any editor of choice. I actually already have Visual Studios open, and we'll talk about all of this later, but I just want to go over like the basic stuff. So when you open up your script, you're going to see the things that we talked about earlier, our start component, our update component, but we can delete all this stuff, and we can talk about it. So we started by, this is a script that we saw earlier, but we basically started by creating a rigid body to refer to the rigid body that we have. So we can do in Visual Studios, rigid body, RB, and now we have a variable, the rigid body, that can store a rigid body. I keep saying rigid body, so let's stop saying that. But I can now define it in the start method. Rigid body equals game object get component. We're basically calling our game object, getting the component it refers to, and then we can say rigid body. So we're basically getting our blue cube's rigid body, and then in our update method, we can use that component and say rigid body dot add force, and then we'll give it a vector. Actually, yeah, add force I think will work. Yeah. So and then we're just gonna do that. I guess there's a lot of things rigid bodies can do. But yeah, so this vector right here, we'll talk about this later in a different workshop, but basically it's like an array that stores coordinate data. This is basically telling the rigid body of our game object to move in the x direction by one impulse. The unit system in Unity is a little bit weird, and I think I've been using it really recently, so it's a bit different than I remember. But basically, now that we have the script attached to all of our cubes, it will, I think this will work. If we run the game, and coding on the fly is never a good idea, but I think if this works, no, it didn't work. I should give it a little bit more. Let's do 100 or something. Add force. It might be add impulse, but let's see. Okay. All right. So now when we run it, add force works. Okay, yeah. So we should see something happen. Maybe I gave. Oh yeah. Okay. The blue cubes move. They fly
No
off the stage.
way.
Holy crap! Yeah, it's moving.
They're
Okay, yeah,
gone.
it's awesome. Okay, so now we gave these blue cubes, and notice how they all moved. I know it's pretty crazy. They all moved because we gave the initial prefab the script example components, and it modified the rigid body component that we also gave our cubes. And now we started with nothing, and now we have this amazing game, by the way, that can move our cubes like a breeze in the wind. So that basically is pretty much all that we're going to talk about today. We created some objects, we gave them components, we gave them script components, and we modified those scripts. And yeah, moving around in Unity, saving your work. You can also go to Control, File, save. And yeah, thank you for watching this demonstration. And I think after this, we'll have some more question time, and we'll also have a little bit more space to go over some other stuff. But basically, if you want any further knowledge about any of this, I would definitely recommend looking at the Unity manual or the Unity documentation, because there's a lot of things you can do. There's a lot of game components. There's a lot of modifiers. There's a lot of things. Unity hides so much stuff that just typing randomly in your script component that you'll find some crazy things. Not like that, but yeah, I think that covers it though. If anyone has any questions, please ask in the chat. But yeah, thank you for watching. Boom.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I guess we'll have time for extra questions and stuff. And in the meantime, I might also try. I think we have those
Yeah.
extra tidbits. Um, yeah, the recording will be posted in the what's it called? The
Oh,
previous meetings channel.
previous meetings. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who came here with already an existing knowledge of Unity, I felt kind of bad because you might already know some of this stuff. So, and that's totally fine. So I thought we should maybe
Yeah.
show you things that you may already know anyway. But uh, these things are kind of cool. So I'm sharing my screen right now.
Yep.
And then I wanted to go over Pro Builder and Visual Studio IntelliSense. These are things that some things you might overlook that are super useful. So I have this empty project here. And I'm going to add something called Pro Builder to it, which is a package that might help you when making your game, at least to start out in. So, by the way, let me know if the stream, Jonah, let me know if the stream
It's
quality is
working.
good.
Yeah.
It's working? Okay, sweet.
Oh. Yeah.
Okay. Then in the Window tab at the top,
Is this part also being recorded?
yes, this is. Yes, this
Yeah.
is. I'm going to go to the package manager, and first of all, this doesn't come with Unity on its own, but it's in the Unity registry by default, so it should be in here. When you go to the package manager, you'll see a bunch of packages that you can add that are optional. Some of them are already in, like the mathematics one. I think that one's in by default because math is pretty cool, but I was somewhat. But There's one called Pro Builder that is not included by default that is super useful. So I'm gonna hit install. Maybe I should have installed it beforehand, but I don't think it's gonna take that long. Um, but when you're making like levels and stuff in 3D, or in some cases even in 2D, um, a lot of people will like make cubes and kind of like stretch them out and scale them up. Um, but you might encounter an issue with that, which is I have an example from a project I worked on semi recently, right here. Give me 1 second. I gotta drag it over. This is another Unity project, right? Um, it's pretty sweet. It was for something. I'm gonna turn off gizmos, which is this button in the top right, so there's all this stuff not showing up. But um, one of our programmers made a thing in Unity. Um, can I find the room? There's only 6 rooms. Okay, here we go, right? And here's the issue they encountered, right? So, as Jonah mentioned, you can make a material and throw it on a thing. So we have this wall texture grass material, right? And it's got this texture on it. And let's just say I want to build a wall like this, right? So what a lot of people will do is they'll press the R key. So W is for move, E is for rotate, and R is for scale. And they'll scale it up like this. And you can see an issue that's cropping up immediately, right? There's ways around this, but this is one of the issues they had, and their instinct was to uh, we have a maze section of the level. Their instinct was to build the maze out of all these tiny cubes, um, which is very not performant and also very time consuming. So I would not recommend doing that. But that's why I'm here to show you Pro Builder, which hopefully is finished installing by now. It has. There's a check mark there. Sweet. So it's very similar to what Jonas showed about creating game objects. Like you can go to the plus, create a game object, create a cube, right? This is a normal cube. It's gonna be gray, I think. Yeah, it's gray. Um, but once you install Pro Builder, this is a package that is not come with Unity, but you can install it. You can make a Pro Builder cube right here, and it looks pretty much the same, but there is a difference. The Pro Builder package lets you actually you edit these cubes or whatever shape you make, similar to a 3D modeling software like Maya or Blender. So in this, there's going to be a component called the Pro Builder Mesh Filter right here, and there's going to be a button called Open Pro Builder. So you can open this up, you'll get a menu down here, and you'll get 4 options in the scene view right here. And some of you might recognize some of these if you're familiar with Blender or Maya, but what this lets you do is use Unity like a 3D modeling software and change shapes of your object individually instead of relying on the scale tool or importing your own 3D model, right? This is useful in cases where, like just say I'm making a dungeon crawler type game in 3D, right, or something, and I don't want to throw a ton of cubes everywhere to make my levels. I also don't want to go into 3D modeling software and model out some complex thing. So instead, we can test using Pro Builder, and it has most of the functions that most 3D modeling software would have. You can create edge loops, you can cut holes in things. So as an example, I'll select this top face and I will cut a hole. This might be blasphemy to some of you who know 3D modeling, but just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to cut a hole right here. Um, Bam, we got a square. And what I can do is I can select this face and I can drag it up. Bam, it affects the rest of it. I can extrude this face um, right here and drag that up, right? So you can see how you can make it'll auto-generate a UV map for this model as well, but you can see how this might be useful to some of you who may open Unity for the first time. You're like, I want to make a house. I want to make a nice room. And so you make a plane, you make a bunch of walls, and it looks great. But if you want to add more complexity to that room, like you want to add like a hallway or something, and you can very easily, like if I organize my game objects into like uh under an empty game object that's like environment, just like in this project here, you could easily get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cubes just Although, assuming you're stretching them out, you wouldn't have this many, but you could easily see how it could get out of hand, which is why I wanted to show something like ProBuilder. This is for people who already have some experience with Unity, or if you just want to learn it, but it may save you a headache in the future. Another thing that I did want to touch on that Jonah also showed live is Visual Studio and IntelliSense. So for some reason, for some people, it's not enabled by default. So this is something you should check if you try using Unity. But um, I'm going to make a script right here. You can either, just like Jonah mentioned, you can make a new script like by typing a name there, or you can go into the project view at the bottom and right-click Create C# script. I'm gonna name it like test script or whatever. And it's gonna make me this script. It's gonna do some script compilation. It's gonna freak out for a second to reload the script assemblies, and then I'll be able to double-click this, and it'll open up Visual Studio. Now, one thing you'll mention from Jonah's demonstration and what you'll see in mine is that Unity will autofill, well, if you have IntelliSense enabled, it will autofill things from the libraries you're using, including the Unity engine up here in the namespace. So if I type in like transform, right, for the transform component, it autofills right there, right? If that's not working for you, I highly recommend looking into Unity's IntelliSense. It should be enabled by default, but if it's not, we will have a guide on that written out, or feel free to just Google and search it up. Basically, if things aren't autofilling for you, try and figure out how to get that working because it helps so much. Please, please, please. It should, unless something goes wrong, when you download Unity and get integrate it with Visual Studio, it should automatically set that up for you. But some settings that might help are is it in preferences? It might be in preferences, yeah. If you go to the edit tab on the toolbar at the top, and in preferences, you'll see this tab for external tools. And luckily, well, hopefully, this should stay Microsoft Visual Studio or whatever thing you're using by default, and it will set up IntelliSense for you. But if it doesn't, make sure to set that. This is more of a case of this should automatically be on, but if it doesn't, you can come back to this and set it up, and it helps so much. That's all the tidbits I had. That's all I had. But yeah, hoping that helped. Oh yeah, someone had questions about ProBuilder auto tiling. By auto tiling, do you mean like automatically tiling the textures and stuff like here? Like so, I'll show it as an example. This is a ProBuilder. Well, it's technically a cube, but I've kind of modified it. I'm still streaming, right? Yeah. So I have this stone wall texture on it. I'm gonna open ProBuilder. I'm gonna select this face and stretch it out this way. It does auto tile,
Yo.
as you would expect. You can also make things not cubes. You can make them whatever shape you want, and it should hopefully turn out fine like that. Oh, wow, I made a triangular prism. That's crazy. Well, not actually, but good enough. You can add more
Beautiful.
vertices. It has a ton of options. But yeah.
Yeah, those are both really good, like
Yes, and
important,
it
like
keeps the
tools.
texture the same scale. Yeah, you can apply your own custom shaders to it. So I think I had a water shader somewhere that was like using it.
Oh,
Oh yeah,
yo.
all that. Yeah,
Music. Oh.
kind of scuffed. But yeah, that is my tidbit for people who have come into this workshop knowing the basics of Unity about game objects, components, and all that. And maybe you didn't know that. Maybe you didn't know that. So there. Yeah, that's all I got.
Sweet, that was great. I honestly I need to use ProBuilder more. That's helpful. But if anyone has any questions about any of that stuff, ProBuilder, game objects, scripts, components, we'll talk about scripts in future workshops too. But if you want to ask in the chat, or unmute. Other than that, though, thank you guys for coming. And yeah, we'll be around for a little bit for answer questions. But that was our first workshop. Thank you guys all for coming. Yeah. Boom. Boom. Yeah, thank you. Boom. 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 All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Boom.
Thank you.
Oh.
This was great.
Yo, thanks.
Bit of a question, sorry.
Yeah.
I was messing around with Pro Builder and I noticed you could like make a new shape with it, but it automates to it like being a curve. Is there any way to make it just automate to being flat or just not a curve in any way?
A curve, you say? I'll
Like I
share my
press new shape for
screen.
the
Actually, if you want to share your screen, or if you want me to share my screen, I can demonstrate. Um,
I can share my screen, yeah.
sure.
Let's see,
Let's
share
take a look.
screen there.
Austin, this looks sick,
Right.
by the way.
Oh, Austin's working on something
Well,
sick.
Thanks.
Okay, let me just get to a better angle
John, I will
here.
answer your question right after this one. So I definitely see it. So okay, you've got an arch here. Interesting. So
Like
if you hit
I
the
have new
new
shape
shape
selected. Oh,
button, a menu should pop up. It might be covered by that tab right there. Yeah, there it is.
oh.
Well, yeah, the default is it's in alphabetical, I think. I think arch is like just the first thing. I don't know if it's actually alphabetical. I think that's cone.
It
I'm
acts,
gonna assume it's alphabetical. Yeah. So it'll let you
it acts
drag out like
princess, yeah.
the definition of what the yeah.
Uh, that explains it perfectly. It's like perfectly over the top of it. Thank you
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, that is weird. I don't know why default puts that there, but yeah.
Yeah. I just had it in a bad location. I didn't even know it was
hmm
there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you
totally.
so much. Yeah.
Okay, John. 2D versus 3D. Okay. I can share my screen again, because I'll actually show something that may help you. Um, so 2D versus 3D. What did I just delete? I deleted something else. Okay, whatever. Um, hopefully you're watching and you can see this. If not, someone let me know because I can't see the Discord. But um, when you actually create your Unity project, so I'm gonna make a new project. I'm not actually gonna make one, right? You'll have all these templates, right? 2D, 3D, etc., etc. URP. What is URP? We'll mention that in a different workshop. But these are different rendering pipelines. I would personally recommend URP if you're starting out because it's pre-set up with a more advanced renderer, but it's not super complicated to use. Whatever. I would select 2D, but if you haven't, then there in the package manager, just like Pro Builder, there is packages just for 2D stuff that are super useful, right? Um, like 2D animation, 2D sprites, like the functionality for all this stuff. But what basically is going to happen with your 2D project is that there are versions of the components that Jonah mentioned, like this box collider, right? You could
Yep.
technically set up the camera in a 2D perspective. For as an example, in the camera component, which is this super big component, at the very top, there's a setting for projection. You could set it to orthographic, which is what I would say most 2D games have as their camera type. Um, if you want. And you could set up all of this with 3D models and whatever. But there's another way of doing it, which is the 2D uh, system, which has its own components. So if I go to like colliders, right, you'll see like box collider 2D, capsule collider 2D, right? There's 2D versions of all of these components, as well as I don't think I have the uh, packages installed, but you'll see that when I right click or hit the plus at the top to create an object, you'll see a 3D object section. If you have those packages installed, you'll have a 2D object section where you can go and use 2D objects instead. Additionally, um, in the top right, there's a button for 2D, and that will set your camera to a 2D style view, like this, which I would say most 2D games would prefer over the 3D kind of style. Um, in terms of how similar they would be, um, it's pretty similar in that, right click 2D object, pretend I have the 2D object setting here, um, and I create, it would be like a sprite or a square. I think they have options for like some basic shapes and then a sprite where you could put your own image. Um, and then in terms of like physics and stuff, you would use there's a rigid body 2D. There's a set of 2D colliders you can use, which have the same functionality for the most part. Um, and in your scripts, you're going to have to reference the 2D version. So if I mention rigid body 2D, I would have to mention rigid body 2D instead of rigid body, or it's going to freak out. So that's how they are in terms of how similar they are. Do you have any other questions regarding that, or did that help?
Nice.
Sweet.
Yeah, yeah. Unity it can do a lot of things. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I can do a ton.
it can too much. But yeah,
Yeah.
well, if anyone has any more questions, we'd be happy to answer anything.
Yep.
But thank you guys for coming. Yeah.
Yeah, Jonah